okay with that. Uh, I think that's it for the beginning. I just want to introduce Laura Becker, who's going to say a few words. She is the president of Nice TESOL, and then we were going to get started with our presenters. So Laura, welcome and thank you for partnering with us for this exchange of ideas.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. If you can open up your chat and just keep your chat on the side, we'd love to hear where you are calling in from today. And as you have questions or ideas or things to share throughout the presentations, you can just put them in the chat. I wonder, is Carol Numrich here? I think I saw her name before.
Yeah, hi, Laura.
I just wanted to, hi, Carol. Oh, good. I wanted to shout out Carol because one of the things that probably most of us realize about New York TESOL is it's a pretty small community, even though New York is so big. We wind up being in each other's circles in different times. I actually taught at the ALP myself a long time ago, probably, I don't know, like 94 or something like that, thanks to Carol. And it was a great experience. And I am really, really so grateful to Bobby for putting together such a great panel today. 3 awesome presentations that we're all going to be able to take ideas from. And I wanted to just quickly also tell you about another great opportunity for a lot of idea sharing and connecting in New York TESOL, which is the conference coming up. So we have a 50th anniversary coming up of New York State TESOL, and we all exist because of the organization, all of us as professionals in New York State doing the work we do, whether with adults or with K-12 students. So please consider coming if you're not already registered. We have 2 days, Friday and Saturday, absolutely packed. There's over 100 sessions on the 2 days. And we have some wonderful speakers. You can click through on our website and actually see the entire program. So you get a really good idea of what you'll be in for. And I have a 15% off code. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's promo 2020. So use it for 15% off if you haven't already signed up. So it's going to be absolutely wonderful. And some of you already, I know, are registered or presenters, etc. So I just wanted to give a plug for the conference. Carol knows John Fanzelo very well. Some of you do. He's one of the first presidents of New York State TESOL, and we're going to be honoring all of the past presidents at that event for 50 years, 1970 to 2020. So please definitely come and be involved in the conference too. And thanks so much to the presenters today. I'm really looking forward to the session. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Laura. I just we're going to dive right into it, and we have our 3 presenters. They are going to present for 15 to 20 minutes, and we are going to have a very short Q&A after each presenter. And then if there is more time, we are going to have a longer Q&A session at the end. As you can see here, my name is Bobby Cruchin Q&A. So if you could send your questions to me, because then I can read them and direct them, that would be easier than creating a general side conversation. So just when you go down to the chat here at the bottom, instead of sending it to everyone, to Bobby Cruchin Q&A if you have a question. I think that's it. So our presenters today are Brittany Ober, Lydia Fass, and Christopher Collins. And I'm really thrilled because they are my colleagues, and I know they are awesome, as Laura said. And I'm really looking forward to what they have to say. So Brittany is going to be the first presenter, and the title of her presentation is Teaching Grammar in the Remote Academic Writing Context. So take us along, Brittany.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and make sure that everybody can see that. Yes? Okay, and I'll put it on the slideshow view. So thanks so much for coming tonight to see us present. As Bobby said, my name is Brittany Ober, and I'm a lecturer in language at the ALP. My presentation tonight is about teaching grammar in the remote academic writing context. And I'm just going to get started with grammar. So I love poetry, and Ezra Pound once said, "Make it new." That was his mantra. But I think that's kind of impossible when we teach grammar, right? If we make it new, we aren't going to be able to teach the English language. So my advice for us in the remote context is to do these four things, if possible. Make it manageable, make it interactive, make it visually appealing, and make use of the tech that you have available to you. And so when I say make it manageable, I really mean don't do anything that's too over your head. Try to bring in your best practices from the physical classroom to the online classroom. Making it interactive, I think we have a lot of actual opportunities to make grammar a little bit more, I don't know, fun and interesting in the remote online world. Making it visually appealing. My PowerPoint is not so visually appealing, but you'll see what I mean by this when I go through the slides. And then making use of tech. And so just to give you some context, at the ALP, the tech that we use is Zoom. Our Canvas platform is our online management system. And I'm going to reference those two because that's what we use, but I think that you can apply many of these ideas to other platforms like Google Classroom or other online management systems. I do want to also give you some context about the students that we teach at the ALP and particularly my students. And so I'm teaching right now 2 academic writing classes. One of them is a group of undergraduate students at the for General Studies at Columbia. And they're really high level. I would say in the CEFR context, it's a C1 class. The other group of students that I'm teaching are international students at the School of International and Public Affairs, and they are graduate students, and they're about the same level. And so everything that I'm going to show you today comes from activities in those 2 classes, but I do believe that the techniques that I'm going to show you can be applied to any group of students at any level. I also want to mention that my activities today are not based in any research. These are really about practical applications that I'm hoping that you can take from and use immediately in your classrooms. And so I hope you'll enjoy. And one more thing, nothing I'm going to show you is that revolutionary or something that you have to do much training to implement. So I hope that you will learn something new from it. The first thing I'm going to talk about tonight is screen sharing. And so I think that most of us are using the screen share as I am now. We all know that teachers can use the screen share, but students can also do this. And they can do this with the whole class, but they can also do it in breakout rooms. And I love when students can share the screen in the breakout rooms because they can really learn from each other that way, and it makes it more interactive. They can share a Word doc, they can type on it, they can also put up an assignment that they have recently completed in the Word document. They can also use the whiteboard function in Zoom, and they can use a pencil to draw on their iPad, and that will be shown to anyone who's looking at the screen. They can share a Google Doc and all work on it together, and they can really share anything that they want. And so this is a really cool way to get students kind of working in groups the way that we would want them to be doing in the physical classroom, and that we're kind of not able to do right now. So I'm going to show you how I use the screen sharing for cohesive devices. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague Lila Maylandi, who actually gave me this idea a long time ago. But it's really fun to do this kind of thing in the classroom, in the breakout room, when the students are sharing their own screen. This is a paragraph coming from William A. Galston, and it's about populism. And this is a text that we read in SEPA. and he's really skillful at using cohesive devices. So the first step of this type of lesson would be to have the students read the text, obviously, and then after we've discussed the text and gone over the content, we start to look a little bit closer at the language. And so here in this paragraph, I would go over these types of cohesive devices with the students. You can see green, I'm considering those to be verbal bridges. That would include things like linking and transition words, and sometimes longer phrases. The red are repetition and synonyms. And so you can see how sometimes words will be directly repeated, sometimes it's the same word family, sometimes it's a synonym. The blue is this plus a summary word so that you can refer back to previously established concepts in the paragraph. And the purple, which is a little bit hard to see on the screen, but the purple is pronoun reference. And so the students will go through the paragraph, they will try to find these elements individually, and then they will see this on my screen as the teacher. We'll discuss any differences or questions that come up. And then for homework, after we've gone through this, they will write a paragraph in response to Galston, and I will tell them that they have to use at least one of each 4 types of cohesive devices. I tell them that they can color code it so that we can see it more easily when we review it in the next class, but I'm really telling them that they have to use these devices. When they come back to the next class, the first thing that we'll do is go into breakout rooms, and I will ask the students to share their paragraphs on the screen. They will walk through the other students in the breakout rooms and tell them what each color-coded element of the paragraph is, and then they have a chance to ask each other questions. Sometimes students will not be quite sure what a verbal bridge is or how it's different from a transition, or if it is different from a transition. And so they can start to discuss these things. I will be able to pop into different breakout rooms and see what's going on, and then we'll come back as a whole class and discuss the activity and look at maybe 1 or 2 examples. So this is one way to use screen sharing to make this a little bit more interactive for students, and it's fun with the colors, I think. I do see some things coming in the chat. Bobby, am I supposed to be managing that, or am I supposed to ignore that?
You're supposed to
just ignore
present.
it.
I'm managing
Okay.
that.
Okay, just making sure. Moving on to the next activity, since we're doing this pretty quickly, I want to talk a little bit more about breakout rooms. So I did just mention breakout rooms, but I love to use them a lot. And another way to use breakout rooms is to use them to review grammar done in the class, directly in the class. So recently in my academic writing class, we were looking at negative inversions. We completed a worksheet as a group. We went through that, and all the students filled it out, and then we checked their answers as a class. The way that we checked the answers as a class was that they were putting their answers into the chat, and then I was copying them and pasting them onto a Word document that I was sharing. And in this way, we were able to really get through the form, the meaning, and the use of negative inversions and get them to be very accurate. After we were satisfied with the worksheet, I had them write original sentences based on content. In this unit, we were reading about critical race theory and how American teachers teach history in the US. And so they were writing negative inversion sentences based on recent articles that we had read. I gave them about 10 minutes to do this with the video on, but the audio muted so that they could really take their time, check their form, and make their sentences compelling. And then after that 10 minutes, I sent them into breakout rooms to share their sentences. Usually I don't ask students to check each other's grammar. Sometimes it's a little bit too much for them, but I thought in this case, it was actually fine for them to do that because they had the worksheet that they could really check the form if they had that negative adverb, if they had the auxiliary verb, the subject, if everything was okay. They also had to use their critical thinking to check their meaning, if that negative inversion was really responding to the articles that we had read or not. And after they had gone through this process, again, I was popping into the rooms, but I asked the students to choose their group's best 2 examples, and then they shared those 2 best examples with the whole class. We looked at them on a Word document that I was sharing, and we checked to make sure that everything was good. So this is a fun way to kind of make the grammar practice. Yes, it is very controlled at this stage, but it makes it a little bit more interactive, interesting, and I always like to save any of the Word documents that I'm sharing with my class and post them back in Canvas so that they can review that content again. So it also gives them that opportunity to review. That's just one way to use breakout rooms. I think that breakout rooms can be used in so many different ways, and they're really fun for students. So that's the only way I'm going to show you tonight, but that's fun. Okay, the next technique I'm going to talk about is color coding, and I'm glad that Carol Numrich is here because she's the one who got me on the color coding train, I would say. Color coding, I think, can be used for so many different reasons. Recently in my academic writing class, I was using it for students to begin to notice language for concession and refutation. This was happening on Monday in my class. And after this event tonight, I will be teaching my class, and we're going to actually learn how to write these sentences or practice how to write these types of sentences and actually paragraphs. But the color coding helped us to begin to raise the awareness of what concession and refutation is and what types of language it includes. We were also using color coding on Monday to help us to paraphrase an excerpt from an article, sentence by sentence as a class. And so we were doing a pretty, tight paraphrase of an excerpt, and I was highlighting each sentence with colors and calling on different students. I can see them in the gallery view, and I can say, hey, student A, can you read the blue sentence? Can you give us a paraphrase of that? And by calling on the students using this color coding, it really helps for them to be able to stay focused because they don't know who's getting called on next. And it also helps them if there's any kind of tech lag. Sometimes the students are about a second or two behind me. And so by saying the name of a color, they know where I am in the text. And I'm going to show you what this kind of looked like. And I know this is not exactly clear. I tried to take a screenshot of my computer and it came out a little bit funky, but you can see here the green sentence and the yellow sentence were aspects of when I was calling on students and saying, can you paraphrase this part of the text? This first paragraph here is the writer's concession. And so the writer here is discussing inequality, income inequality, and he's saying that, yeah, there are a lot of problems with income inequality. Such as health issues, social problems, reducing economic mobility, and weakening democracy. But then in the second paragraph, some students had trouble figuring out what was Mark Buchanan's real opinion about income inequality because they weren't sure what was happening here with the refutation. So I began to highlight the refutation language in red to show them more clearly what was going on. And we talked about this word assuming, which we had discussed before with reporting verbs, and we refresh, why is it kind of critical to use the word assuming when you're discussing someone else's work? In this case, it's research. This helped us to see that this second paragraph was flipping the first on its head. And then I kind of, we talked about what concession and refutation is. And I mentioned to the students that we would be working on that in tonight's class. And so this was a good way to begin to notice the grammar, to begin to pay attention to the language, and to keep everybody focused. I do want to show you what I'm going to do in my class tonight with concession refutation. And so this is a chart that I have. The students for tonight's class read a letter that Adrienne Rich wrote to refuse the Medal for the Arts in like 1994, I think. And so we're going to read her, they read her letter. We're going to discuss the content tonight, and then we're going to look at her claims. And then the students are going to write some concession refutations about this letter. So I gave them some idea of what that would look like by making columns with categories for how you would construct these sentences. You can see that I broke it down by concession language, the subject of the sentence, the reporting verb, and perhaps the object. the transition word if you're using two independent clauses, and then the refutation. And when the students are going to be doing this tonight, we're going to practice verbally, but then they are going to write these types of sentences, and I'm going to ask them to use a color coding system for each of the categories in the chart. And so again, they'll be able to check if they have each of the elements. We'll be able to check them as a class pretty easily with this chart, and the color coding makes it a little bit more visually appealing. And I think the students actually really like doing this type of thing because they can see very clearly if they're doing it correctly. Okay, I just want to check the time. I feel like I'm racing. The next thing I'm going to talk about is using polls for grammar. So polls are a function of Zoom. If you're not using Zoom, I'm not sure how to use polls in any other platform, but if you are using Zoom and you want to use polls, you probably know that you need to set them up ahead of time before you actually go to the class. And so the way to do this is to log into your Zoom account, go to the class time and date that you want to put the polls in, and then toward the bottom of the screen, there's a way to add these polls. And so when I teach reporting verbs, I like to use polls as a way to check if my students are learning the differences of the many reporting verbs or if they're still having trouble. And so before we do the polls, I'll teach it actively, what are the reporting verbs? What are the grammatical patterns of the different kinds? And what are the differences in the shades of meaning? Because there are so many differences for the students. And so we do some controlled practice. And then they go home and do a little bit more just exercises with these. But in the next class, we will look at some different quotations that come from texts that they read, and we'll decide what reporting verb would best introduce these excerpts. In this class, we were reading kind of a feature from Muhlenberg magazine. Muhlenberg is the place I got my undergraduate degree. And they put out this really kind of concise guide to the election, and 6 different authors wrote about one election issue. And so the students had read all of these, they're 1 page each, and they got an overview. And I took one quote from each of the 6 authors, and then I made a poll by putting the 6 quotations on a worksheet and leaving the space for the reporting verb blank. Then in the poll, I gave 3 choices for each of those blanks. So it was a multiple choice poll, and the students had to decide which of these reporting verbs best matches the content of what comes next. If you see this quote here by Niesenbaum, I'm not going to read it out loud for you, but I gave them 3 choices. I said argues, criticizes, or says. And then I was able to see pretty easily, most of the class picked argues, which is correct. And some of them put criticizes, which is not correct. So I was able to see what kind of sort of rehab we had to do on these reporting verbs. And this is really fun for the students. I don't know if you guys use them or not, but when they pop up, they get to click something. They don't know who's choosing what, only I get to see that. So again, it helps them to kind of save face if they make the wrong choice, but it gives the teacher a lot of useful information. And then the next step with the reporting verbs lesson was that they went home and did a little bit more of this with their own sentences. So they picked one of the authors, and you can see that, I mean, this is very small, but you can see most of them picked Emanuela Kuschik. I don't know if I'm saying that correct, but they had to paraphrase one of the things from one of the sentences from the article, and they had to choose the appropriate reporting verb. So they did this at home for homework. When they came to class the next day, we began class with this exercise, and I asked the students to put their answers into the chat. That's why it looks like this with the timestamp, and I deleted their names. They're not all XX, but basically each student put in their answer. I would post them into the Word document, and as a class, we would discuss if the reporting verb matched the content and if there was any other grammatical or vocabulary issue going on. So it helps to make it a little bit more interactive for the students. And the last thing I'm going to show you this evening is just how I kind of can put all of these elements together. So this is just an example of a short writing which is going to receive peer feedback in a breakout room. And so this writing is done at home, and this was a recent assignment from my academic writing class. They had to write one paragraph answering the following question. How does Peculiar Benefits, which is by Roxane Gay, connect with Letter from a Birmingham Jail, which is by Martin Luther King? And I give them quite a lot of direction as to how to construct their paragraph. So we happen to be working on pie structure at this point in the semester. Pie, if you're not familiar, is point, illustration, explanation. So students have to use a point or a claim in their topic sentence. They have to give an example to illustrate that claim, and then they have to explain why that's significant. So they had to do that. They had to highlight the different elements of the paragraph with the color coding, and they had to use at least 3 vocabulary words from the unit. Those were put into bold. And then the grammar for this week of the class was articles, the use of the specifically, and verb tenses in the paragraphs. They were having a lot of trouble with keeping a consistent verb tense between simple present and simple past. And so the student, one of my students generously let me share her paragraph here for you. You don't have to read the whole thing, but you can see how she was able to highlight the different elements of her development. She kept a consistent verb tense. Her articles were pretty correct. She used 3 vocabulary words, and her point that she made here was quite compelling. And so I think by having the students with very clear instructions for what to put in their paragraph, when they go into the breakout rooms and then they share with each other, the peer who's giving the feedback knows exactly what to look for, and they can discuss the paragraphs at a very concrete level, not in an abstract way. And so this was a really great activity, putting together many different elements of writing and specifically grammar. And I'm pretty sure that's it. I hope I did okay with the time. If you have longer questions for me, this is my email, and you can be free to email me anytime. And I guess, Bobby, I will ask you if there are any questions, and I don't know how much time we have
Thank you,
left.
Brittany. There are no questions at this
Okay,
point, and I think we're going to go right into Lydia's presentation for the
good.
sake of time. Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much for all these wonderful activities. Yeah, let's clap. So I would like to introduce Lydia Fass, who's also a lecturer at the American Language Program at Columbia University. And her presentation is using a Google Doc as an interactive chalkboard in a remote classroom. And I'm going to put her slides on the chat. She sent me a PDF of her slides. So for those of you who couldn't access the shared screen, just hold on a moment and it's going to appear in the chat. Thank you, Lydia. Take us along.
Alrighty, and let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see the slides? Yes, excellent. Okay, and I will try, since there are some folks who are following along on the PDF, I'll try to let you know what slide I'm on. I'll try to remember to do that, but let me go ahead and begin. As Bobby said, I'm talking about using a Google Doc as an interactive chalkboard in a remote classroom. And I actually think that, Bobby, you ordered these presentations very nicely, because a number of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to follow well to what Brittany said. And I think that you can see how you could apply the way I use Google Docs to some of the activities that Brittany has shared with us. So just a quick overview, I'm going to very quickly tell you what the purpose is of using the Google Doc as an interactive chalkboard. And then I'm going to go into 3 specific activities that I do using the Google Doc to make the class more interactive. And finally, I'm going to end with some caveats and advice. So let me get started with the purpose, which is slide 3 for anyone who's doing this themselves. I originally started out with a Google Doc because I was looking for a replacement for an in-person chalkboard. And you all know how dependent we are on writing on the chalkboard and having some way to be able to share written information with our students. But what I also found is that this is an excellent way to focus the students' attention and to encourage active participation. It also is a wonderful resource for students, not only in class, but after class. And Brittany referred to this with her Word documents, but what I do is I download the Google Doc at the end of class, and then I put it into the online class site so that the students can access it, go back to it, look at a specific example or correction that we did in class, and they do use it. I know that because if I forget to post, I get emails saying, where is it? So they do use it in that way. So let me go into ways that I use the Google Doc interactively. And I do call it a chalkboard with my students. So I'm going to call it the chalkboard with you. They know what I'm talking about. I have them well trained. I start off by trying to create an interactive environment. And to do that, I ask all of the students to sign on to the Google Doc at the beginning of class. Now, this does a couple of things. First of all, it ensures that all of the students can open and edit the document, which is important. They don't always tell you if they can't, but you can see them all typing their names on, so you know that everyone's there. I also use it for taking attendance, for my attendance record. And the students know this, so they know this is how I take attendance. And so I've now put the responsibility for checking in for the class on the students. The other thing that this does is by having them sign on at the very beginning of class, it's now giving them permission to write on the chalkboard and encouraging ongoing participation. So this is saying, this is not my chalkboard as the teacher. This is our chalkboard as a class, and it's yours as much as mine to use as a tool as we work through the next, for my class, 3 hours. So I'm on to the next slide. So first I have students sign in, and then the way that I use the Google Doc throughout the class is to put directions, to put explanations, to put examples. And because the students feel like it's theirs as well, they actually follow along, and I can see them. I can see them clicking on the Google Doc. So for those of you who don't know, when you click on the Google Doc, your name shows up, and every student shows up in a different color, which is really fun. So you can see the students following along with their cursors. I see students highlight specific words, maybe a word they don't know, they want to look up. Perhaps they're highlighting an example that has really, that's important to them. I see them copying text. And so now what's happened is the students are not only intellectually engaged, but they're now actually physically engaged, which is really important when you're sitting in your chair for 3 hours. You have to be moving some. I also use the Google Doc as a way to focus the students' attention. So I might highlight some text and just say, does everyone see where I am? Everyone look at where I'm highlighted. Please click here so I can see that you're with me. So it's just keeping them on track. I also might find that we're discussing something and there's a point that they're missing, so I can just come in and highlight as we go. I could change the text color. I can underline the text. So this is a way to really emphasize, to really highlight, and to really focus attention for the students so they're not just watching. Okay, I'm moving on to the next slide. So let me move into some activities that I do that facilitate active participation. The first one is going over exercises, and we all do this, whether it's a homework exercise, maybe it's grammar, maybe it's a writing exercise, something they've done in class, but we need to go over these. So what I do is that rather than putting the answers onto the chalkboard, I ask the students to do it. So let's say there's 10 questions. I'll number from 1 to 10, and then I'll say, okay, student A, please put the answer for number 1. Student B, you have 2. Student 3, C, you have 3, etc., etc., and let the students put the answers on. Now, this does a couple of things. First of all, everyone can write at once, so they're all engaged simultaneously. Nobody's waiting. This is something that might be better than the real classroom where they have to wait for the chalkboard or they break your only long piece of chalk, but everybody can be writing on it at the same time, so they're all engaged. But also, the teacher can monitor what's happening. So I watch as the students put their answers on the chalkboard and I give them feedback. So I might say, number 2, I think you might have a spelling error. And the student goes back and looks. Or number 3, check your verb tense. Number 5, are you sure that's the right answer? I think you should take another look. So what's happening is while the students are putting their answers on the chalkboard, they're interacting with me. They're getting individualized feedback. They're correcting their own errors. By the time everyone's finished and this whole process is over, all the answers are correct. So then you can just have everyone look at the answers and say, are there any questions? The other thing that happens is that when we go over the questions, because they're all right, all of the students have this sense of accomplishment, right? Because when their classmates look at their answers, they're right. They got it right. They can have a sense of pride. And I've been able to help them get there, but it's been them doing the answers. Also, there's no losing face. There's no, oh, I have the only wrong answer on the chalkboard. I feel terrible. So this is a really nice way to go over the exercises, give the students individual feedback, and in the end, have everyone have a good feeling about their language. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about something that Brittany talked about, and that is group work in breakout rooms. And I think this is one of the areas where you could really apply the way I use the Google Doc to some of the activities that Brittany was talking about. For group work, and for us, that's breakout rooms, I use this for information sharing. Now, all the groups have access to the same Google Doc. So if it's an activity where they're going over answers and perhaps each group is going over a different set of answers or producing answers, they can write it on the Google Doc. They can also take notes on the Google Doc. But what's really wonderful is they can all contribute at the same time. So this becomes collaborative. So there isn't one student with a pencil. You don't have to pass the pencil. What I find is very often they talk about an answer, one student starts writing it, the other one is thinking about something they don't want to forget, so they write it down at the same time. Then the students come back to it. Perhaps they take turns, but this becomes a collaborative effort. These notes or these answers that they've put on the Google Doc also become the reference for follow-up activities. So if the students are reporting back to the class, they all have the same set of notes that they can use. If they're doing a jigsaw activity and they're sharing their information with other students from other groups, they all have the notes. They don't have to worry about sharing them or taking pictures so that everyone has them. So this is really good for the speaker. It's also good for the other students because the other students can look. The speaker can say what point they're talking about. The other students can look and follow along and see the notes as well. The speaker can add notes as they go. So again, it becomes more of a give and take process. It's also very nice for class management because as the teacher, any of you who use breakout rooms knows, you can't see all the groups at once. And so it can be a little bit frustrating, but if your students are putting answers on the Google Doc, on the chalkboard, you can see what all the groups are doing. So I can see that group 1 is going very quickly. I can see that group 2 has not written the thing on the chalkboard yet. So maybe I need to dive in and give them some help. Or perhaps group 1 is going quickly, but there's no correct answers. So this is another signal to me that I want to go in and help this. So I'm able to monitor them all, whether I'm in the main room or in one of the breakout rooms. The students can also communicate. They can communicate with me, whether I'm there or not. They can write me a note. I can write a note to all the students saying 5 more minutes. For those of you who use breakout rooms, you could broadcast a message, but I don't think the students see it very often because it's very quick and fast. So I can put in big red letters, you have 5 minutes left. Students can type a question to me, whether I'm in the room with them or not, and I can answer it. So this is our way to communicate even though we're separated. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. The third activity that I want to talk about is interactive student-centered error correction. So what is this? This is correcting student answers to exercises. It could be excerpts from student writing. It could be oral errors, which you could do in real time, or you could do them after an activity, save them up and share them. How do I do this? I try to involve the entire class in understanding and correcting the error. And again, because it's on the Google Doc, that's easier to do. I can say, okay, let's all look at this sentence right here, and we can examine it together. And then I work with the students, I provide guidance to get the answer, but I actually have the students make the physical corrections on the chalkboard. So now they're, again, physically involved in correcting their own errors. And this could be any student. Sometimes it's the student who made the error. Sometimes you point it out and that student gets it right away and they jump in and correct it. But other times they don't know what the error is. And then another student can jump in and give an explanation. And when that happens, I ask the student who gave the explanation to make the correction on the chalkboard and then to explain what the error was and why they made the correction. So now what's happening is the students are taking some of the responsibility for the teaching and they're interacting with each other. This reinforces the language point. You have all of the students participating actively, and it gives a sense of ownership over the learning to the students. So they're now actually part of this learning activity. All right. Another outcome, and I'm on the next slide, oops, is what I find is.
I just want to say like 3 more minutes.
Yep, yes, I'm close. What I find is by having this interactive error correction, it leads to self and peer correction. So students start to focus on accuracy as well as content when they're writing on the chalkboard. They write their answers, they stop, they look, they go back, they correct, and they start to learn to check and edit without being prompted. So they start being very aware of their own language and this editing process. And the other outcome is that students learn to work as a team and give each other feedback. So again, this becomes a much more collaborative, less teacher-centered environment. Caveats and advice, and this should take me 2 minutes, Bobby. One of the issues that does come up with using the Google Docs is it takes time to type. If you're sitting there and you're trying to type out directions, for me, I always make typos when I'm trying to do this during class. Some folks need to look at their keyboards. You've now taken your focus off of your students. My solution is that before class, I create a Word document that has all the text for the chalkboard. And then during class, I simply cut and paste. Now, yes, this is time consuming, but we all know that teaching online prep is more time consuming. I find it's really worth it. Not only is everything ready to go, I've thought about the wording and the language, but also I only need one document for my class. So I can have the directions, the explanations, the examples, everything for the students ready to go, but I can also have my teacher notes. I can have my lesson plan. If I'm doing a video that's 10 minutes long and I want to stop it at 6:34, I can put a note to myself. I can note my groupings for different activities, answer keys, etc. So now I'm only looking at the Google Doc and the students and my Word document and nothing else. So just final advice, it's really helpful to set the Google Doc up ahead of time and then share it. And when you share it, you want to select anyone with the link can edit it. But I don't notify the students. So there's a button to notify. I don't do that. What I do is I copy the link, I put it onto my Word document, and then at the beginning of class, I just share it by putting the link into the chat. And again, I use a new Google Doc for each class session so that I can download at the end and put it onto our Canvas site so that the students have access to it. So to sum up, the Google Docs are a useful tool for interactive online teaching. For the teacher, it's a way to focus and engage students and give them opportunities for active participation. And for the students, they become active participants in the learning process. They have a sense of ownership, and you've now given them a tool for collaboration with their classmates, both in and outside of class. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. For the sake of time, we are not going to have Q&A now. There were some technical questions. I'm going to put Lydia's, or Lydia, can you put your email on the chat so people can email
Absolutely.
you?
I didn't put that in there.
So I want to introduce our last speaker, Christopher Collins, and he's going to be talking about promoting cooperative, collaborative learning in the remote learning environment. So
here we go. Thank you. Thank you, Bobby. And also thanks to Brittany and Lydia for talking about interaction and collaboration and all these good things in both talks. So yeah, and I dropped the slides in the chat if you need to see those, but I'll be discussing them now. You know, this phrase cooperative, collaborative learning, I think we can treat it as a synonym for interaction, okay? Productive interaction. But I just want to talk about what I've noticed based on my experience, both being a student and being a teacher in a variety of contexts, both in person and online in the past few months. Because this is the part that stands out to me that requires extra attention in the remote teaching context. So let me just set my timer here so I don't forget. Okay. I just want to start. Well, I've already said, or Brittany already said, that we use Zoom and Canvas. So, you know, that's what I'm familiar with in terms of the tools. I haven't tried anything else, so that's all I can really comment on. But I think some of what I'm saying is going to be applicable to a lot of contexts. And so I'm going to talk about, first of all, I want to mention some education and SLA perspectives on cooperation and collaboration. I think we treat it sometimes as something we just take to be a good thing, but I just want to like kind of explicitly remind ourselves why it's a useful thing to facilitate interaction. And then I want to say something about my own experience because I've been in a variety of contexts in 2020, both in person and online. And then some observations, challenges, and tips. And then finally, some ideas for facilitating collaborative, cooperative learning. So I have a few quotes I want to share, but you know, I shared the slides and I'm going to share them after. So I'm just going to kind of summarize what I think is important from the quotes. There's an exceptionally useful meta-analysis about cooperative learning from about 20 years ago that looked at dozens of research studies about the role of cooperation and group work. And basically, it says that, you know, it works. I mean, it's going to be the thing that really facilitates learning more than a lot of other things. And it has so many different outcomes. But a few outcomes that I think are really important in the remote learning context are motivation. Okay, different forms of motivation, because I found in my role as a student, as a graduate student this year, that sometimes being a student in the remote learning context, it's a little strange. You feel a little bit alone, even when you're with a group. And I think that presents some challenges for motivation. Maybe it's just me, but I think that I've noticed this. And then if we talk about interaction from an SLA perspective, I mean, the big takeaway, if you look at something like the interaction hypothesis, is that interaction facilitates acquisition, right? And as language teachers, that's what we're trying to do, facilitate acquisition of the language. So interaction has a role in doing that. If you want to dig into these quotes after, I would encourage you to. So I think about it this way: students working together creates a community of learning and facilitates language acquisition. And I think that the way that this works, it flows in a few directions. The community of learning is students working together. It's also facilitating the language acquisition. The use of the language acquisition, it makes the interaction work. So these things are all working together back and forth in every direction. So I want to just bring up my own experience for this year because it informs how I approach this topic a little bit. Like probably many people in this Zoom discussion right now, I had the mid-semester interruption as both a teacher and a graduate student back in March. And there was, you know, a hasty adaptation to remote synchronous teaching and learning, okay? And I think a lot of people were just trying to scramble and make something work. But I also participated in designing some courses for remote learning for the summer. And then I was teaching in the summer synchronously live like this on Zoom, but I was also being a graduate student both for a synchronous class and an asynchronous class. And then finally now in the fall, I'm teaching both in person and remotely. So, and I'm learning remotely as a graduate student synchronously. So I'm seeing like these different perspectives and the feelings of being in different roles, student and teacher, in person, remotely, and it's kind of informing me from different perspectives. And I think about teaching in person right now. It presents all kinds of new struggles, by the way, that we may not be thinking about if we've gotten used to remote teaching. In any case, some of the challenges or observation I've noticed include that, I feel like we need to facilitate a community of learning maybe more explicitly and more thoughtfully. I think as teachers, it doesn't matter if we're language teachers. I don't think it matters if you're in person or remote. I think creating that community of learning is really important. But I feel like it just doesn't necessarily happen. If you're in a physical space and you walk into a classroom and you sometimes see other people, that sense is gone when you're just doing it on Zoom, I think. So I would say that taking a more proactive approach to creating that community is probably necessary. Some of the ways that have been discussed already by Brittany and Lydia, I think, are part of that process, building an interaction consistently. Another observation that I've had is that you can feel kind of alienated even within a group setting. Like you could be with 30 people, you could be with 20 people as a student, and it's somehow you kind of feel alone in a sense, or can. I mean, maybe not everybody feels that way, and this is from the remote context. And I think that it presents additional challenges based on, whether a person may be more introverted or more extroverted. I noticed that I would lean towards the more introverted side. And I find that whereas I might feel comfortable in a group setting, physical setting as a student to speak up, I might not do that in the Zoom class for whatever reason. It feels like I'm speaking to a group rather than within a group. And there's something there that's challenging. And conversely, one of the writing classes I'm teaching right now, that I have students who probably never speak if I don't call on them. And I have students who always want to speak. And, this is a dynamic that exists in the physical classroom as well, of course, but it's something that needs to be considered. And as I said, speaking within a group rather than to a group. So the first thing, so my points here are big points, somewhat differently than Brittany and Lydia. So I would say seek opportunities to integrate collaboration in lessons whenever possible. And some ways have already been discussed in this conversation tonight. I would seek opportunities for small talk. I think that's one of the real things that we're missing. And I think Lydia has shared an idea with me that perhaps she comes to class on the remote context a few minutes early, or some other people have mentioned that, and encouraging students to come early to class just to create some kind of interactive space that's not so specific to the class itself, the class topic. And if, breakout rooms have been mentioned a couple of times, we'll talk about breakout rooms in more detail in a moment. But if you're using Zoom, those breakout rooms have so much potential, so much opportunity. And I think there's a lot that's there. So, for reading tasks, do the comprehension at the group level, then the class level, rather than maybe just the class level. For writing tasks, writing to a shared space. For instance, in the ways that have already been discussed, in Canvas, there's also the discussion board feature that can be really useful. And then sometimes what I find myself doing is having students write individually to the shared space or collaboratively, but then doing the feedback at the class level. And then I even think that maybe peer feedback may work better in a remote setting. I tend to find a lot of similarities rather than differences with the remote context, but if you're setting up peer feedback presents all kinds of challenges, and it needs to be facilitated and practiced and so forth. But I think having two students work in a breakout room without the distraction of noisy neighbors, without a sense of not having privacy, for instance, I think that Zoom can overcome some of that. So regarding breakout rooms, there's some considerations. You know, one of the things I like about breakout rooms is that you can create productive groupings, and I think it's important. If you're doing the same groupings every time, I know as a student I might find that frustrating. So I think it's important to mix people up. But also, if you notice that people don't necessarily work together, or they're at different levels of proficiency in a way that's counterproductive, et cetera, well, you can always kind of micromanage how you group people without them knowing. So I would really encourage randomized groupings. I know it can be, for me, frustrating if I have a 3-hour class as a student and there's a lot of breakout room tasks, then I'm always with the same people. Yeah, variety is good. And I think there's some consideration when you use the breakout rooms, the role of privacy. Are you going to, as a teacher, enter the room? Are you going to leave it to them? Again, as a student, I found that the breakout room can be a productive space to work, to learn with classmates. And then, even though I know that the teacher may not explicitly say this, when they come in the room, I feel the pressure to say the correct thing, to demonstrate that I understand things. And it can be a little awkward. So I would consider, are you going to go into the room as a teacher? What is the purpose for doing so? Have you told the students, etc.? There might be grounds for variety with that. Of course, in any, I would say any language learning activity, clear tasks are so valuable. I mean, they're easier said than done, I suppose. But if people are going to be in that room, I think it's important. And clear reporting tasks to follow up. I also find that sufficient amounts of time is a really valuable and important thing to consider. Things seem to take more time on Zoom or in the remote teaching contexts. And I think I wouldn't use the phrase less is more in this situation. I think people need more time to do things. So it's something to consider. And when thinking about group work, I came across this quote that I like, and it says from Mike Long, it says, pair work and small group work offers learners relative privacy and anonymity. They can try out new language beyond the glare and scrutiny that typically comes with full class participation. And I find that somehow that glare and scrutiny might be a little bit more present when you're speaking to the whole class on Zoom, where they're all in front of you like an audience, rather than sitting around you as a circle or in some other way. So I think it's something to consider. I have if you want to explore those quotes in more depth, those papers are all here. My name is Christopher Collins, and that's what I'm going to say for today. And whatever questions you may have, or comments, or suggestions, or tips, I'd love to hear them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christopher, and Lydia, and Brittany, and all the participants. So there are some technical questions about, is there a breakout room in a Microsoft platform? I personally don't know. If anybody knows, they can reply on the chat. It's 5:29. I think we have 1 minute. If anybody wants to say something, ask a question, say hello to their friends. But I think it's been a wonderful opportunity to share ideas and to reflect on remote teaching and this idea of what it is that we are doing that we weren't trained for, and all of a sudden we have to do very quickly, and how can we do it well, and how do we learn as we go along. So I want to thank our speakers and our participants, and Laura from Nice TESOL, and say goodbye to everybody and wish everybody a good evening and a healthy weekend.
Thanks so much. It was wonderful. Excellent presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks,
For
everybody.
the American Language Program is so
Thank
good.
you, everyone.
We're lucky,
Thank you.
lucky to have you present. Come back November 13th and 14th. Christopher, we'll have community. We'll hug on Zoom. We'll bond.
Oh,
We
Yes,
will.
and attend the
Oh, I'll be there.
call.
I'll be there.
I'll be there too.
Yay.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks,
so
Bobby.
much, Bobby, for putting it together. Wonderful sessions.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby.
you.
You're
Thanks,
welcome. Thank you,
Bobby.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Brittany, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
So I just sent you a quick message because I arrived late. Is there any way to get that link?
Okay, let me see. 1 second. There's so many things in the chat. Can you tell me again what it was?
I just sent it to you privately. I just said that I
Oh.
arrived late, and because of that, you don't see the chat from before. So I must have missed the link to your slideshow. So I was
Oh,
just,
no, I didn't put it in the slideshow
oh,
because I
okay.
had student work in it, but I can, if you
No problem.
email me,